Welcome back to Jimmy Stories with another interesting story that you will love, so sit back, lock in and enjoy this impacting story. Elijah, a young black man in his late 20s, had just clocked out after a long, exhausting day at work. As a construction worker in New York City, the physical demands of his job often left him drained. This evening was no different. He boarded a crowded subway train, hoping to find a moment of peace before getting home. The train was noisy, packed with tired commuters like himself. Elijah found a seat near the door, slouched against the wall, and let out a sigh of relief. The subway screeched to a stop at the next station, and the doors slid open. Among the new passengers boarding the train was a visibly pregnant woman. She seemed to be in her third trimester, her large belly making her movements slow and deliberate. She clutched a small shopping bag in one hand and the pole in the other, her eyes scanning the train for a seat. None were available. Everyone either avoided her gaze or pretended to be lost in their phones. Elijah noticed her immediately. He saw the strain on her face and how she swayed slightly with the motion of the train. Despite his own fatigue, he knew he couldn't ignore her. With a quick sigh, he stood up and gestured toward his seat. "Ma'am, you can sit here," he said, his voice steady but kind. The woman hesitated for a moment, her eyes locking on Elijah's. It was clear she wasn't used to such gestures, perhaps wary of being a burden. But the growing discomfort on her face made her decision for her. "Thank you," she said softly, giving him a tired smile before carefully lowering herself onto the seat. Elijah grabbed onto a nearby pole and steadied himself as the train started moving again. He noticed how the woman shifted in the seat, trying to make herself comfortable. She clutched her shopping bag tightly, her breathing a bit labored. Elijah didn't think much of it, she was pregnant, after all, and the city's heat wasn't making things any easier. The train rumbled on, its rhythm broken only by the occasional screech of the brakes. Elijah glanced around the car, noticing how other passengers either watched the scene from the corners of their eyes or stayed glued to their screens. The moment seemed to pass quietly until, suddenly, it didn't. The woman's breathing grew louder, uneven. She clutched her chest, her face contorting in pain. A low gasp escaped her lips as she leaned forward, her body trembling. Elijah, still standing nearby, noticed immediately. "Ma'am, are you okay?" he asked, his voice rising in concern. She tried to respond but couldn't. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Then, without warning, she collapsed, sliding out of the seat and onto the floor. Her shopping bag tipped over, spilling its contents, a few baby items and a bottle of water, onto the dirty subway floor. Gasps rippled through the train car as passengers froze, unsure of what to do. Some stood up from their seats, craning their necks to get a better look, while others instinctively backed away, their faces a mix of shock and fear. Elijah dropped to his knees beside her, his heart pounding. "Somebody call 911, he shouted, his voice echoing through the train. He gently turned the woman onto her side, trying to make sure her airway was clear. "Ma'am, can you hear me? Stay with me." A middle-aged woman nearby fumbled with her phone, dialing emergency services. Another passenger, a young man in a hoodie, stepped forward with a bottle of water, offering it to Elijah. "She's not breathing right," Elijah said, his voice shaking. He looked around the car, hoping for someone with medical training to step in. "Is anyone here a doctor?" The train conductor's voice crackled over the intercom. "We've been informed of a medical emergency in car 3. Please remain calm as we pull into the next station. Emergency personnel will be waiting." The next few minutes felt like an eternity. Elijah stayed by the woman's side, doing what little he could to comfort her. Her breaths were shallow, and her face had turned pale. He placed his hand on her shoulder, whispering words of reassurance even though she seemed barely conscious. The train screeched to a halt at the next station, and the doors slid open. Paramedics rushed in, carrying medical bags and a stretcher. Elijah quickly stepped aside, explaining what had happened as one of them checked the woman's pulse. The scene was tense, passengers watching in silence as the medics worked swiftly to stabilize her. As they lifted the woman onto the stretcher, Elijah caught a glimpse of her face. Despite her condition, there was a flicker of gratitude in her eyes as they briefly met his. She mouthed something, perhaps thank you or help, before the medics wheeled her away. Elijah stood there, his heart still racing. The train conductor announced a brief delay before the train would continue its route. Passengers began to settle back into their seats, the initial shock fading into quiet murmurs. But Elijah couldn't shake the image of the woman collapsing or the sound of her labored breathing. As the train moved again, Elijah found himself lost in thought. He wondered about the woman, what had caused her collapse, whether she would be okay, and if anyone would be waiting for her at the hospital. His exhaustion seemed insignificant now, replaced by a mix of worry and a lingering sense of responsibility. After the paramedics took the woman away, Elijah couldn't shake the scene from his mind. He spent the rest of the subway ride replaying it, feeling like he could have done more. When he got home, he told his sister, Amaka, about the incident. She reassured him, "You did what you could. Some people wouldn't even give up their seat, let alone try to help." Still, Elijah felt compelled to find out what happened to the woman. The next day, he contacted the hospital mentioned in the conductor's report, giving them a description of the woman and the time of the incident. At first, the hospital staff hesitated to share information, but a kind nurse confirmed the woman was stable. She had suffered a sudden spike in blood pressure, which could have endangered her and her baby. The nurse mentioned that Elijah's quick actions, alerting others and staying calm, had helped save her life. Relieved, Elijah left his number in case the woman wanted to contact him, though he doubted she would. Days turned into a week, and life returned to normal. Then, one evening, Elijah received a call from an unknown number. "Hello, is this Elijah?" a soft, familiar voice asked. It was the woman from the subway, whose name was Ngozi. She explained that the hospital had given her his number and that she wanted to thank him in person. They agreed to meet at a small cafe near his neighborhood. When Ngozi arrived, she brought a small basket of fruit as a token of gratitude. She told Elijah about her life, how she had been on her way home from a prenatal appointment when she fell ill, how she was scared for her unborn child, and how his kindness gave her hope when she felt most vulnerable. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't stepped in," Ngozi said, her voice trembling. "You saved me and my baby." Elijah waved it off humbly, saying, "Anybody would have done the same." But deep down, her words touched him. As they talked, Elijah learned Ngozi was a single mother-to-be. Her husband had passed away in an accident months earlier, and she had no family in the city. The pregnancy had been difficult emotionally and financially. Hearing this, Elijah felt a growing sense of responsibility. He offered to help her however he could, whether by running errands or just being a friend she could rely on. Over the following weeks, their bond grew. Elijah accompanied Ngozi to doctor's appointments, helped her set up her apartment for the baby, and provided her with much-needed support. Though his days were long, he found joy in their friendship. Ngozi, in turn, became a source of inspiration for Elijah. Her strength and resilience reminded him of his late mother, who had raised him and his siblings under difficult circumstances. When Ngozi went into labor, Elijah was the first person she called. He rushed to the hospital, pacing nervously outside the delivery room. Hours later, the cries of a newborn filled the hallway. A nurse came out to tell him Ngozi had given birth to a healthy baby boy. She named the child Elijah, in honor of the man who had helped her when she needed it most. Holding the baby for the first time, Elijah felt an overwhelming sense of purpose. In that moment, he realized that a small act of kindness could ripple into something far greater. It wasn't just about giving up a seat, it was about showing humanity in a world that often seemed indifferent. From that day on, Elijah became a close part of Ngozi and baby Elijah's lives. Their friendship turned into something deeper over time, built on trust, respect, and shared experiences. Together, they formed a new kind of family, proving that even in a city as big and chaotic as New York, strangers could come together to create something beautiful.